Hey guys, welcome to the infamous Poultry FRQ. Yes, this really was an FRQ on an actual AP test, but it's one of the tricky ones that we've been talking about, and so it's good practice for you guys to try to answer these kinds of questions and see what you can come up with based on the information you already know. So I'm just going to walk you through how to go about answering this FRQ. The first part that you'll notice is that there isn't any stimulus. You don't have a map to analyze or chart or anything like that. So you're just reliant on what you can come up with in your brain. The second thing you're going to do is you are just going to read that context at the beginning and see what you can decipher from it. So the restructuring of agriculture in the late 20th century has had important implications for rural land use and the distribution of poultry, chicken and turkey production in the United States. Okay, so first and foremost, oh my goodness, it's an entire FRQ about chicken. Yes, really. I do realize that most of you have very little background information on the production of chicken in the United States, and AP knows that too. Again, this is just another one of those great examples of you having to take the concepts and theories and information and knowledge that you have gleaned throughout the course of our year in class and apply it to a situation that you don't know anything about. Okay? Now, reading that context, there's a few things that jump out. First and foremost, this restructuring of agriculture. Okay, so taking it from what it was to what it is. Late 20th century, that would be 1950 through 2000. Okay, implications for rural land use and the distribution. Okay, so where poultry is located in the United States. Okay, so we're talking about specifically the United States, and we're talking about distribution and production. So those are the things we need to keep in mind as we answer our questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have 3 sections. And this I would actually encourage you all to just get used to doing. So it's asking A, B, C. A, it's asking for 2, B, it's asking for 2, C, it's asking for 2. So I'm just going to make a really quick outline. A1, A2, B1, B2, and C1 and C2. Okay, you can even put it into columns if you want. Also, pay attention as always to those indicator verbs. The first for A, you are listing. Let's highlight. You're listing. B, you are briefly describing. So a list is like identify. That's one sentence and you're done. For B, briefly describe. Now, if it just said describe, you're into 2 to 3 to 4. Briefly describe, I would keep it to 2 sentences. And then C, you're into describe. So that's going to be at least 3 sentences probably. Okay, so let's just look at A. So list 2 factors that have increased the demand for poultry. Now, this seems like a really tricky question at face value, but if you think about it, you know what chicken is, right? You know what turkey is. When do you eat chicken? When do you eat turkey? Where do you eat chicken? Where do you eat turkey? Think about those kinds of concepts. The first things that come to mind are, well, I can buy chicken at pretty much any fast food restaurant. They even have fast food restaurants specifically geared towards chicken. So, if you talk about Chick-fil-A or Popeyes or KFC, Pollo Loco, all of those kinds of fast food restaurants are specifically chicken based. Okay, so I would talk about how there is, if you want to put it in, AP geography lingo, I would talk about a prevalence. Oops, back to my pen. prevalence of chicken. You can get it everywhere. It is available. And I would even mention those restaurants that we talked about. Chick-fil-A, KFC, okay, or others. The second thing I would talk about is if I compare a chicken dinner, I can get a rotisserie chicken at Costco for $5 or Walmart for $5. If I want a steak dinner or a roast, or if I want pork chops, it's much more expensive. So you could talk about cost. Chicken is cheaper. Than the other traditional meats like pork or ham, or ham is pork, beef, those kinds of things, fish. Chicken is the cheapest. Additional things, so I've got 2, right? I don't need any more. It asked me to list 2. I should only list 2. But additional things you can talk about. Chicken is healthy, right? All of these low-fat, high-protein diets, chicken is a good choice for that. It has health benefits. It's safe. Okay, if we talk about some of the issues that you run in with beef or pork, like mad cow disease, chicken doesn't have any of those kinds of issues. You could talk about there are groups that don't eat the other kinds of meats, right? We know that Hindus don't eat beef. We know that Jews don't eat pork. Muslims don't eat pork either. And so there's no religious taboos against chicken. Okay, those are some other options that you can include for A. All right, let's move to B. Briefly describe 2 characteristics of the present economic organization of poultry production in the United States. So, present economic organization of poultry production in the United States. So, this is going to take me to our unit on economics, the organization of corporations, control, all of that kind of stuff. Who's in charge of what? This would be like mass production types of stuff, or vertical integration, those kinds of things. Commodity chains, right? All of those kinds of things. So if I'm thinking about poultry production, I've just talked about how there's a prevalence of chicken everywhere, which then leads me to, okay, well, if there's a prevalence of chicken, then some people somewhere are going to have to be mass producing chicken. Okay, so there's going to be large scale operations. It's not just, mom and pop shops. In every state, there's a few people who are, cranking out a few chickens every day. That's not how this works. Okay, we're talking large scale, shipped to the entire United States kinds of operations. The other thing that I would talk about is you're going to find, because of this prevalence, right, and because of the chicken being cheaper, that would suggest that there are people who are specifically specializing in only chicken. Okay, so I would talk about specialty farms that only have chicken or poultry. Okay, so there's my 2. You could also talk about how large corporations could control all of the different steps in your commodity chain, in your production chain. So they're the ones that, if we get into the agriculture stuff, this would be a mixed use, right? Where they're growing the they're growing the feed, they're using what they grow to feed the chickens. The chickens are then processed there on site, and then they're shipped out, right? So they have full control over all of the different steps in the poultry production process. You could also talk about things like certain feeds that are used to make the chickens grow faster or make them get bigger. All of that kind of stuff you could also use to answer this economic organization of poultry production. And then let's go to C. So C is describe 2 features of the present geographic distribution of poultry production in the United States. So geographic distribution, this is going to be where is stuff located. Well, okay, so chickens are small, right? They're not as big as cattle or pigs or sheep, right? But if we're talking about mass producing chicken, which we've just talked about, large scale operations, then we're going to need an awful lot of area. And if we're using a corporation which controls all of the elements in sort of this mixed use farming idea, then they're going to need lots of land. Okay. Now, if we talk about chickens, also, well, chickens, just like and maybe there are some of you that actually have chickens, but you know that chickens don't smell very good. They're kind of stinky, like most farm animals. And so you're going to need large plots of land that are away from, a large population. You're probably going to want to be in like a rural type of setting. Obviously, you're going to want to be on flat ground. You don't want to try to raise chickens in the hills or in the mountains. So all of these things are things that I would use to explain the geographic distribution. Now, a couple of things that I want to just bring up. It doesn't ask for a specific location, okay? It only asks for features of the geographic distribution of poultry production in the United States. And so this is where I would talk about explaining the requirements for chicken. That's going to be your rural, flat, large areas. Okay, and all of this, you're only going to find those types of stipulations or requirements in a few places, which is going to then suggest that chicken farms are going to be clustered. You're going to find lots of chicken farms in the same area because they all need the same sorts of things, right? Or concentrated. You could also say they're concentrated in certain areas. The other thing I would mention is that if you are shipping out chickens, whether live chickens to the butcher or chickens that have already been processed to market, you are going to want to be close to market or close to easy transportation options. Okay, because you've got to get your chickens out, right? They are not making you any money if they stay on the farm. So these are the two things that I would specifically focus on. There are obviously others. You could talk about labor. working on a chicken farm is going to be the type of agriculture work in the United States that's going to attract immigrants. So you could talk about that. You could also talk about labor in the idea of it will attract, or it would be found in low wage areas. You could also talk about any environmental concerns. Things like waste and pollution. All of those can also be used to explain this geographic distribution piece. Okay. Hopefully this helps break down something that seems like it might be tricky, but really when you look beyond, it's not that big of a deal. So if we're identifying distractors here, the distractors is this idea of chicken, right? Poultry, they're asking you for a very specific agricultural process. They know that 95% of the people across the AP students across the planet didn't get a very in-depth look at poultry farming. They know that. But what can you take from what you've learned about rural land use and the restructuring of agriculture as it goes from, small mom and pop shops to large scale commercial type farming that's mechanized, that's automated, that has those multiple tiers, right? Mixed use, that kind of idea, where you're doing everything in the same spot instead of, they hatch the chickens here and then they raise the chickens somewhere else and then they butcher the chickens somewhere else. That's not how it works anymore. They're all doing it in the same place. So this restructuring of agriculture piece, coupled with the rural land use piece, you guys have enough information. You have the knowledge to answer this question, even though you don't know specifics about poultry farming, okay? So you have to look past that distractor of poultry and look to see it's actually asking you for the restructuring of agriculture and how it has affected rural land use in a geographic and economic perspective, okay? That's it. It shouldn't be too bad. Hopefully this helps. If you struggled with this question, I'm hoping that this was able to kind of walk you through an easier way to look at it. If we go to the next slide, it's actually the rubric. So take a minute to go through it. We've talked through most of it already. But again, I hope this was good practice. We'll do probably a couple more of these before the end of the week to help you just prepare for what's coming next week. And let me know if you have any additional feedback that I need to know about. Take care, guys, and I will talk to you later.